Hi, so I'm Tom Banks. I'm with Banks Brothers Motorcycles. I live in the Pittsburgh area, and I'm an avid motorcycle collector and also a cannonball rider. You know, for anybody to do a cannonball, you pretty much have to have a team. I'm not a great mechanic. I wouldn't go too far without having a team with me. So I was blessed to have my brother G-Man, George Banks, as my head mechanic. My good friend Paul Greenwood, another antique guy that's in our club that you know, plays with the antiques with us every day. Paul came across and helped us. And of course, Mr. Hart, my motorcycle mentor. You know, Mr. Hart was the fellow that, you know, really introduced me to motorcycles along with my father at a young age. And, you know, we've been hanging out with Mr. Hart playing with the bikes ever since. But these guys went across the country with me and we had a really great time together. Hey, so we're talking Cannonball today. Cannonball 2018. So how'd we get to the Cannonball 2018? Well, to the best of my understanding, in 2010, Lonnie Ism Jr. had a bunch of friends that he rode with and kind of decided that they wanted to turn it into something. And in 2010, they started to coast Cannonball. Eventually, it became bigger and bigger. In 2017, we lost Lonnie. Lonnie passed from cancer. Prior to Lonnie passing, he had a great friend by the name of Jason Sims, who he sold the Cannonball to. So Jason has been the guy that, the CEO, so to speak, of the Cannonball, and he did run the race in 18. At this point in time, you know, the race continues to grow. I think this year we had maybe 107, 108 riders to start. I believe when we got across there to Portland, Oregon from Portland, Maine, we had approximately maybe 90 riders still going, or I know at least in the high 80s. I don't know the actual numbers, but a good group of guys still going. Whether everybody made all the miles or not, there was still a great group of guys and gals that continued to go across the country. But the Cannonball's probably the premier race in terms of antiques. And race isn't a good word, it's more of an endurance thing. You know, we're not really actually racing one another. We're kind of racing our machine. We're trying to get our machines to go across the country. This year, you know, it was approximately 3,400 miles, 3,425 miles, give or take, so. My bike of choice for riding the 2018 Cannonball was my 21 JD. Although this bike was restored to its original condition, we had to make several modifications to prep the bike for the race. So we had a lot of discussions and planning sessions in order to prep the bike for the rigorous travel conditions. So one of the things we had to do, we had a bike that was a really original bike, the 21. I mean, as original as any bike that we have here in the clubhouse. So in order to race it, we had to make plenty of modifications. I'd say the number one thing would be the wheels and tires. You know, you have to be able to go down the road and have a bike that'll handle and, you know, so on and so forth. So we have, you know, drop down rims along with a Metzler and a Pirelli tire, which made us, you know, pretty aggressive. It handled really, really well. We also looked really hard at the braking system. In the rear, we have a Pat Murphy rear, the setup with knucklehead front brakes. Okay, the backing plate is a Pat Murphy backing plate. He makes that special just for that setup. And then in the front, we have a Honda 350 CL. Okay, the Honda, that gave us a couple dual brakes up front, which allow us to really, the bike stopped. It stopped really well. We tackled everything else with the bike. One of the big things was generator. You know, that was an A generator that was on there. We changed that out to a D. We also changed the distributor to a flathead distributor with a panhead points. We have a panhead coil on the bike. We changed that. Another big thing was the carburation. The original bike had a Chevrolet carburetor. We put a Linkert M51 carburetor on it. And it took us a little bit of time to get that all dialed in. But all that was kind of things that we were doing to try to bulletproof the bike the best we could for the race. You know, we changed the springs in the front, inner tubes, just everything you can imagine. Your sprockets, chains, you know, the whole primary, or that whole drive chain is all ready for the race. So we did do a lot of prep work on all that stuff. You know, one of the toughest things for us was to actually get out there and get on the starting line the first day. And the reason that was difficult for us was not only was it our first year, but we never really had the bike dialed in. We never really got the bike dialed in until we got out in Portland, Maine. And a lot of our headaches were related to something as simple as the battery. There was a little tiny battery in it that wasn't holding up. So when we got out there, we got it dialed in. But prior to getting out there, that took us some time. You know, we were running late with everything. We never got our tools loaded up quite in time. You know, we were kind of battling over who was taking what tools because we were scrambling at the end. We didn't really have a real game plan because we didn't have the bike dialed in. Once we got out there and we got with some other guys who were, you know, the Rob Nussbaums and the JD guys of the world that kind of helped us out and got us going. But getting out there and getting to that point was definitely a challenge. I think once we started the race, you know, each day got a little better. Of course, we did blow a motor, but after that, you know, never had another hiccup. So a lot of fun, but definitely a challenge. So when we actually started the race, we had a little 10-mile race from where we were staying into Portland, Maine. Well, that was interesting. We finally had the bike kind of dialed in. What we didn't really realize early on was anytime we moved the primary chain or moved the secondary chain or anything like that, that we had to, again, adjust the linkage. So we took off on the 10-mile race and we went into town. We just had first and second gear. So that was a challenge, you know. That was actually the first time I really got a chance to ride the bike, and I only had first and second gear. We got in and I said, hey, G, I said, you know, I only got first and second gear. The linkage isn't right. Okay, we'll get it adjusted. So now we have a short period of time because the miles coming in didn't count, but the miles going back actually were the first 10 miles that counted. So when we go in, you're just all set up for the photo shoot and everything, and you're around we were by the Atlantic Ocean. It was actually a beautiful setting. Well, so we tweaked it up there in Portland, Maine. Well, now we got to leave, and it's time to go, and we have second and third gear, but no first gear. So that was probably even more difficult. So I ran most of the red lights, most of the stop signs. Dropped the clutch a few times, may have stalled it once, or maybe not. I might not have stalled it, but anyway, I got the 10 miles back, and that night, you know, we actually got the linkage dialed in where we took it around the parking lot a few times to make certain that we could go 1, 2, 3 with the gears, and we were good to go. So then the next day, it was off to, now we were really ready to start going. It was off to Keene, New Hampshire, was the first real leg of the run. Keene, New Hampshire was, you know, typical Northeast ride, you know, through backcountry roads. Is absolutely a beautiful little ride. The bike actually ran pretty well, and we only had 155 miles that day, which, you know, was kind of, to be honest with you, was kind of easy. Didn't have any problems, didn't anticipate any problems, and I went to mileage and really felt good. Came in that night and said, you know, let's tweak it up some, and we thought we were in good shape. So the next stage was Keene to Binghamton, New York. And actually, we had started out, we were doing pretty well. I was riding with a guy by the name of Dave Courier, number 64. Dave's a great guy, man, from Fargo, North Dakota. Dave was on a 15 Harley, and we pretty much rode together every single day. We had become friends 3 or 4 years ago back in Vegas, and again, Dave and I took off, you know, and headed for Binghamton. Was doing pretty well. The bike seemed to be running pretty well. At about 175 miles into the day, I started to hear a noise from the motor. You know, initially, I thought maybe it was my primary chain clanging a little bit on the primary. You know, but the more I went, the louder it got. Pretty soon at about 190 miles, I pulled off to the side of the road because it was really, at that point, there was no doubt in my mind that if I kept going that I was gonna scatter the motor. I pulled off, Dave pulled off with me. We shut the bike down. Actually, the bike was still running. I said to Dave, I said, you know, I've got something internally, definitely, you know, I'm gonna implode the motor. You know, if I don't shut it down, I'm gonna blow it. So we kicked it, you know, without turning the ignition on, and you could just hear it even when you kicked it. We actually started it once. The bike started back up, and Dave said, oh, no, I agree with you, Tom, shut it down. And obviously that was what we had to do. I shut the bike down, Dave went on, and Dave actually made it in, he did fine. We had to go on the chase truck that day, or the truck of shame is what we call it. So I was 65 miles out of Binghamton, I was done. The motor was blown. I reached out to George and Paul and Mr. Hart and let them know that I indeed had blown the motor. And fortunately, we had a second motor with us. We had Rob Nussbaum had saved our butts on that one. Rob had got us a motor just prior to the race. We knew we was having some problems with the original 21 motor, so we did. We were fortunate we took a backup. Taking the backup motor and putting it in overnight, it cost us 200 points, so obviously you have to take a penalty for changing the motor. But again, you know, we wasn't going to win the race on a 21. It was about riding across the country. So George and Paul and Mr. Hart, you know, they were on it pretty much into the night. It was a cold, damp, rainy night in Bingham. I went to bed, and you know, when we got up in the morning, they said, hey, Tom, you know, the motor's in, we got an issue with the generator, but the bike will run. Fortunately, we got bailed out because we got a rain day the next morning, which meant I didn't have to go to try to ride with no taillights or no headlights. And to be honest with you, I think I was gonna punt. You know, you have to be smart. You have to know exactly what you can do. If that was a really bad day, I was glad they canceled because, like I said, without a taillight, without a headlight, and a driving rain would have been, you know, pretty darn dangerous. But they did cancel, and we were able to get the bike up to the next stop, which was Jamestown, New York, and we were able to switch the generator out, you know, put the generator from the 21, which was the D, which was already set up with the correct coil, the panhead coil, and the flathead distributor with the panhead points. So now we were, you know, really ready to go. And to be honest with you, from that point on, we never missed another mile, we never missed another checkpoint. And you know, that's really a credit to the mechanics, man, because they really kept the bike going. For me, it was just a matter of going out there and you know, riding it, shifting it, dumping oil and so on. But from that point on, we did really well. So, you know, the thing that we do each night is when we get in from, you know, the ride that day, is I kind of have a mental thing in my head of what issues we need to work on with the bike. I may have troubleshot something out during the ride where I didn't maybe, you know, really fix it. I just fixed it enough for me to get in. So after we got a routine going, what I would do is I would come in, I'd go straight to George. I'd go, hey, gee, okay, here's what's happening. Boom, boom, boom. George would get with Paul, and you know, they would tackle whatever the issue might be. You know, the biggest thing for us was when I blew the motor out in New York. You know, obviously, while they were loading the bike onto the sweep truck, you know, I reached out to George. Hey, gee, there's no doubt I've blown the motor. You know, let's put the new motor in. And you know, when I got into Binghamton, New York on the sweep truck, you know, Paul and George, they head right over. They take the bike off, and then, you know, it's on. It's on to have that motor out, the new motor in, and ready to ride the next day. So that's where them guys got to start wrenching, and you know, what you do, G?
Well, the first thing we did after we got the news was we set up. We got the tent up, we got all our tools laid out, and we made sure we had our dinner, and we were waiting for that bike to get back in because we knew time was of an essence, no doubt. Because I think we worked till about 1 or 2 in the morning. We had another crew member from Dave's team, Rod, helping us out. And without Paul and Rod, that bike probably would have never got done. I mean, that was a big job to swap that motor out and then have it going for the next morning. And even with that being said, the generator still wasn't working, but I believe the bike would have made it. It was just a matter of safety, and with the rain coming down, it was a tough one.
Well, the good thing about that day is we actually didn't ride, because that was a really brutally tough rainy day, crappy as heck. But you know, there was still you know, a lot of things that you had to go through when you put that motor back in, like readjusting the linkage and you know, all that. So I think Paul did a lot of work with prepping the motor that night too. Paul, what was a big thing for you?
We swapped out the chains too. We put a no-ring chain in, which really gave us clearance problems we had to figure out. There were some other things we had to deal with, but it went pretty well. We had the motor out ready to go for Tom to pull into the courtyard, and we were ready to tackle the bike. There was no doubt about it. I know during the trips, I was always listening for that phone, George's phone, to ring, because the last thing we wanted to hear was a call from Tom, where they say no news is good news. So when Tom calls, my heart jumped a beat, and we're like, uh-oh, what now? So that was definitely the day when he called and said he blew the motor. And so we knew it was on, and we were ready. We were ready to tackle that motor. We had another one ready to go, and we were just waiting for him to pull in.
And to be honest, you know, we really struggled with that motor, you know, the original motor from the start. You know, it didn't surprise me that we ended up having an issue with the motor, because we just never quite had it dialed in. Once we got that 20 motor in, you know, I even think for these guys, you know, what was you doing at night then? I mean,
maintenance, and Paul was really great with that maintenance that we have to do every day. And we had a whole checklist there, and we each had our tasks. You know, whether it be air in the tire, greasing the rockers, and we have to monitor what gets greased, when it gets greased, checking the chains, transmission, rear chain, and we had issues with that too, which, you know, fortunately Paul and I ironed it right out and, you know, kept the bike going.
We never quite had the tranny right either. The tranny was moving on us.
It was, but we made it across the country.
Yeah.
That was pretty much the point there, and we're going to, you know, change that for the next Cannonball. We're going to upgrade it. And
well, that's if we're,
yeah.
We don't know what we're running in the next Cannonball, yeah. So we don't know that, but in the event.
With this one, we learned so much.
We did. We definitely learned a lot. We went to Rob's Nussbaum's shop, Retro Cycle in New Jersey, and got a quick lesson on Harley-Davidson JDs, which, thank goodness we did that, because it definitely was a lot of help on the.
Now, Rob's one of the, you know, Rob's in the top 2 or 3 guys in the world when it comes to JDs, if not the top in the world, you know. John Newman's good down there in Texas and that. But we were blessed. That was the biggest thing about the Cannonball. We were blessed to be surrounded by the best mechanics in the world on these early bikes, and a great bunch of guys. There's no, you know, you think these are your competitors, you know, you're competing against one another or what have you. You're really not. You're competing against the motorcycle, and you're competing against the elements each day when you're going out there in the ride. The riders and their teams are all kind of, we mostly know each other. You know, we're all antique collectors for the most part. The vast majority of us are AMCA guys. George, myself, Paul, we're all AMCA guys. You know, so we know each other. We've crossed paths at some point. And it's almost like a gang of friends going across the country. You know, oh, we're racing, I guess, but we're really not. You know, we're having, for me, it was more fun than anything. But, you know, you got to keep the bike running, and that's the key. That's the key to make it, you know, is you got to keep it running. And each night, you know, George and Paul had their little task, you know, that they'd go through. And even Mr. Hart had little stuff that he was chipping in on. What were some of the things you did, Mr. Hart?
When I carried stuff in and out of the truck, and I helped put the tent up,
yeah.
And I had to make sure there was ice in the cooler.
Oh, that was a big one right there.
That was a big one. I darn near got fired a couple of times.
Yeah.
Not having enough ice.
Well, yins, you know, yins were a little piggish and all. I got to say that. Yins never did get the trailer squared away. If I were to ever be in another Cannonball, it's not going to look like it looked that time.
It was somewhat of a mess because people swap parts. The camaraderie's fantastic.
It was a mess because you just had it a mess.
Jason Sims was right when he said it's one big family. The friendship and camaraderie and the help that the teams gave one another was
Absolutely.
really fantastic.
Absolutely. We helped other people too. We had easy nights where it didn't take much to get the bikes set up, and we were out looking for other guys having trouble with their bikes, and we'd jump in and help them too. So it definitely was a big family, not just our team, but we were all in teams together.
Nah, it's a great bunch of guys. You know, it's probably kind of like a who's who of the antique world, and it's that 1% that are really, you know, hardcore about. You know, they have this little saying, "Ride them, don't hide them." You know, and that's what these guys are. They ride these old bikes, and you know, they're really passionate about it. And there's some guys that really are really knowledgeable. Like I said, for us, our go-to guy was Rob out there in Jersey. Rob Nussbaum was really, really sharp, and Rob was able to, you know, pretty much give us a crash course in JDs. So.
Yeah, Rob basically saved us. He's a super guy, and he helps everybody there. I mean, the guy's just fantastic.
He did save us, for real.
He saved us, yeah.
Definitely. So the next leg was from Jamestown, New York to Bowling Green, Ohio, about 275 miles, give or take. And here was the thing about that day. That was one of the days that I did not run with Dave Currier, my good buddy from North Dakota. And the reason being was simple. The motor that we had got from Rob Nussbaum out in Jersey was a freshly rebuilt motor that had approximately 15 minutes on it. Rob had it in his machine out there. You know, we saw it, the motor ran. It wasn't no hopped up motor, wasn't built, you know, anything special. It was just a pieced together motor that Rob's guy had put together along with Rob. So the point I'm making is I couldn't just take off and ride. I had to dump oil and shut that bike off early at, you know, 35 miles. You know, then ride it again for 25 miles and shut it down and let it cool. You know, just like you would break in a motor, you know, at the end of the day, we were still trying to go across the country. And that was the one day that I even thought to myself, well, I might miss some checkpoints, but, you know, I'm going to baby the motor to make certain that I'm able to get across with it, because we had no more options. That was our last motor. Well, you know, and that's just what I did. I kind of babied it along, but it turned into a really fun day because we knew we were headed to Bowling Green, Ohio. Now, my mom lives up in Conneaut Lake, Pennsylvania. And as I'm scrolling and turning the map, and I'm by myself because, you know, Dave's running. I'm just kind of laying back and riding. And here, as I turn the map, I see 322. And I'm, you know, 322, gee, I know that highway. That's up around Meadville. Next, I see, you know, Route 18. I'm like, holy cow, that's over by my mom. In the meantime, as we come through this town of Meadville, which I didn't anticipate us doing, I actually see people that I know, they're on the course. Some of them are even yelling out, hey, Tom. So that was a really fun, that was a super fun leg, but it gets better. When we get rolling over towards Meadville, towards Conneaut Lake, I realize that I'm gonna go within probably 3 miles of my mom. I'm on Route 18, I'm going west. I'm on Route 322 going west. My mom is on Route 18 going north. I hang a right, I go about 2-3 miles up to my mom's. I take a selfie, give my mom a hug, and then tell her I'm in the middle of the race, I gotta go. I jump back on the bike, I come right back on course where I left off, and I took it into Bowling Green, Ohio from that point. But that was funny because that area right there was where George and I were test riding the bike. George Paul and I would work on it every weekend in the summer, and we'd test ride the bike right around there. So here, I was actually going to, you know, to see my mom in an area where we had rode the bike before, and I was just laughing to myself, you know. But it turned out that day, that motor ran really well. Bowling Green, there was a nice crowd when we pulled in. It was a nice warm day, I remember it well. And I felt like the motor was quiet, the motor was running really sound. The motor seemed a lot stronger than the first motor we had in. And I think for the first time, I started to have some confidence that I was gonna be able to get the rest of the miles in and to ride the bike across the country. I think so. That was the day for me that really started to say, okay, we got something going now. Now we just gotta, you know, keep working on it. So the next stage was from Bowling Green to, I think it's Barbanius, Illinois. And now I'm back with Dave. I remember that day also because, you know, we were back basically steady eddying it, you know, trying to just coax those bikes across. And we actually had a really good run that day. We were running, we had figured out, you know, that we could run about 85, 90 miles on our tanks of gas without using our reserve gas. We both had reserve gas on the back of our bike, but you don't want to use that unless you really had to. You know, what we were doing was taking our gas stops at about 85 miles. At that gas stop, we'd dump oil. You know, we'd just dump that 4 ounces of oil right out, you know, pump another fresh 4 ounces in, and take off and go back down the road. That was the day when we started really getting in tune with exactly how the two of us were gonna run. Okay, we're gonna go 85, 90 miles a clip, especially on the hot days. We wanna get out there first thing in the morning and run that 85, run that 90. Gas it up, take 15 minutes and get right back on, run that 85, run that 90 miles again. And now most of the days now we're on the upside. You know, we've got the mileage in, the bikes are strong, and you know, we're on the last legs without time becoming a factor. The one mistake you didn't want to make was just, you know, take any of your spare time and use it for granted, because you never know when you were going to have problems, and believe me, they arose. So the next leg was from Barbanius to Anamosa, which was where the National Motorcycle Museum is. Anamosa, and that was awesome because, you know, there was a huge crowd. The Motorcycle Museum was there. We ran into Franklin the Pickers was there. Nice warm day. Just a total blast. Bike ran real good. I was able to run all day with Dave. And it wasn't that far of a run. It was only about 230 miles. So, you know, I remember it as being an easy ride that day. So the next day, you know, we left Anamosa and we rode out to Spirit Lake. That was a pretty good run. That was about 270 miles. And you know, at that point in time, we were pretty much, Dave and I both had routines, you know, pretty much down pat. I kind of knew at that point how Dave rides. You know, when you ride with a guy a couple, 2, 3, 4 days, you know, you get a feel for how he's riding, you know, where he's going to change lanes within your lane, you know, and so on and so forth. So by that time, we were really in tune to one another, and we were just timing ourselves. Our gas stops were all, you know, we were trying to stretch them as far as we could, and we tried to limit our time. Now, a lot of those days, we would have, you would have a lunch where you would stop at like a Harley shop, and the whole gang of us would come in. We would stop at a Harley shop, or it might be an Indian shop, or it might be an antique place. They all had, most of the days we had different stops, and they were mandatory stops where you would go in and do like a little meet and greet, so on and so forth. And that might be an hour and a half long. So that would kind of give you a little bit of break in the middle of, you know, if it was a hot day or a cold day, and it'd give you lunch, and it's free lunch too. You know, you can never beat that. So definitely a lot of fun. That was a good ride in. It was 270 miles. We just kind of stayed right on and cruised, and had another pretty solid day. So when we'd come into a town at night, you know, that was probably the most fun, because number one, people would be lining the streets. You know, as a rider, they almost treat you like a rock star. They really do. People follow you on social media. They come up, they ask for autographs, they get you to sign this, to sign that. They take pictures with the motorcycles. They sit on your bike. They put their babies on your bike. It's an absolute blast. But you know, it's kind of like a traveling carnival. You know, you've got 100 riders. You know, you've got 2 and 3 guys on each team. So in our case, you know, 3 guys. So 4 times 100, that's 400 people right there. You know, with a 4-man team, 100 teams. So when you come into town, to go along with all of us, you know, there's all the people that come in from other towns, and it's just, I don't even know how to describe it. Help me out, guys. How do we describe it?
Well, number one, we have a big rig with a trailer. We set up a tent behind that. So every vehicle takes up, what, Paul, maybe 6 parking spots? 4 to 6 parking spots. And you got 100 guys like this. We set up tents. We have this big pit area, taking entire parking lots of maybe 3 large-sized motels. And then the people just come in off the street and they love it. They watch us working on the bikes, they get pictures with them. It's truly a carnival-like atmosphere.
It goes into the night because we're pretty well lit up, and everybody's got generators going. We have lights set up around our canopies. We got the bikes up on motorcycle lifts, and you got people just coming in asking questions about the bikes, and Tom is real good. While we're working on the bike, Tom would come in and describe his bike and what their day's run was like. And a couple funny things. We'd come into a town, to a hotel, and start setting up our rigs in a hotel room and parking lot, and literally fill the parking lot. And the hotel managers are coming out looking panicky, like, oh my God, I had no idea that this many people were going to show up, and we're laughing. We're just laughing. It's just amazing the amount of people. But you got to consider, like Tom was saying, there's 300 or 400 of us rolling into town at one time. And setting up. So it isn't always how big the hotel is. Can they handle 300 or 400 people? It's how big is their parking lot. So we would take up 2 or 3 hotels a lot of times.
And the people are really amazed because we're talking bikes of the brass era. Big brass headlights, and they blow smoke, and it's just fantastic. It's something you don't see, you hardly ever see. And the Cannonball is just, the opportunity just to be on that is fantastic.
Most all these bikes are bikes you would be lucky to see in a museum. Much less going down the highway, and that's what's really cool, is to see these bikes coming down the highway, and a lot of guys are coming in from hundreds of miles on their modern bikes just to see us. So everyone's having a good time, and it's a carnival. There's no doubt about it.
That's definitely a carnival. That's for sure. I mean, it's one of the wildest atmospheres you've ever been around. You know, it's I don't even know how to describe it, you know, other than it's a lot of fun. You know, every night is a different town, and you know, every night there's crowds, and they want to know about the motorcycles. You know, they're really they're motorcycle enthusiasts, and some of them aren't. Some of them don't know anything at all about motorcycles. They just see the stuff coming into town, and they gotta see what's going on. So, really a lot of fun, man, and definitely something different.
And about at every place you go, there's usually a crowd of 10 Model A and Model Ts. Old guys that want to see the bikes, they ride down in their Model A's. Oh, yeah. It's really cool.
All kinds of people.
All walks, yep. Fantastic.
No doubt, yeah. Okay, so, you know, each night when you go into towns, the ladies like the Cannonball guys, but on our team, you know, it seemed that Mr. Hart got all the action. You know, they didn't pay me no mind, but every time I turned around, there'd be a girl sitting on Mr. Hart's lap, and I was the guy taking the pictures, you know, and actually showing the people, yeah, this is what's going on. You know, I'm shut out. I've got nothing going here. I'm beat from riding all day, and you know, any of the ladies that are coming around, there's a lot of ladies around. You know, Mr. Hardy's. What's going on with that?
I'm an interesting type of guy,
yeah,
and I could tell a lot of good stories.
He can.
Yeah.
He kept us entertained.
I'm not sure where
3,000 miles or better across the United States, and I did not hear the same story twice. He kept us entertained.
I had a good time.
He's a great man.
The next day was a real long haul. We went from Spirit Lake to Pierre, South Dakota. Now, which is incidentally the capital. Now we know we're really starting to, you know, we're starting to get into the trip. We're really starting to get west. It was a hot, grueling day. I remember that. I had, you know, we may have cut our stops down that day to 70 miles, which we did sometimes when it was really, really hot, so that we could stay hydrated. You know, believe it or not, when you got a really hot day and you're not taking liquids in, you think because you got the wind in your face, you're okay. Not so. But we were able to hydrate ourselves pretty good that day, and we just kept riding. And the bikes, again, we were both dialed in. We had very few problems. Dave, I don't remember Dave being along the road a single time with a breakdown. You know, we had a couple issues, you know, maybe setting things up. Once he had a little problem with his clutch that we were able to fix along the road. But, you know, for the most part, he ran pretty well. And I did too, for the most part. I was only down, you know, a couple times, and we did pretty well with that. But that was a long, grueling ride in that day, and a real hot day. but you know, that's Cannonball and it's a lot of fun. So the next run was from Pierre, South Dakota, to the legendary Sturgis, South Dakota. Now, that's a pretty good run, 314 miles. And here's the thing you knew about that. You was gonna get a break, okay? That was gonna be the one day where the next morning, we didn't have to get up and ride, you know? So even for the mechanics, because to be honest, most of the race, you know, I was having fun, but I was also, you know, griping at the guys, you know, telling Mr. Hart that he didn't get enough ice, complaining about whatever George didn't get dialed in, bitching at Paul, you know. There was, I had probably more fun than they did. But anyhow, that was a really long haul on that particular day, but we wanted to get in there because we knew we had that break coming. We knew we could hang out and actually have some fun. In Sturgis, we went to Jason Sims. Jason has the Glencoe campground out there, and we took our rig out there and we set up out there to work on the bike. I know the next day we had the off day. Paul rented an Indian with a couple friends of ours, and he went and rode the Black Hills and all, which was, you know, right around Sturgis in a 300-mile radius. There's just so much to see right there. They was disgusted that they rented the bike to Paul. He put like 1,000 miles on it or something. He beat the poor thing to death. But Sturgis, you know, I hadn't realized how much Sturgis had grown up since the last time I'd been there. I hadn't been out there since I believe it was '99 with Mr. Hart. So going back to Sturgis, you know, 19 years later or wherever it may have been, in 18, it was really something. Sturgis had, for sure, became the motorcycle capital of the world. Everywhere you looked was, you know, everything was motorcycle in Sturgis. And the town itself had grown quite a bit, you know, in the time since we had been there. So we had that layover over there. We had the extra day. It was a kind of a relaxation. We went out and ate. Our bike, we didn't have major issues to work on in Sturgis. It was kind of the normal maintenance, so we didn't have any pressure in Sturgis of having to, you know, trying to get stuff ready for the last, you know, part of the race. We knew going forward that, you know, we were headed towards the mountains and it was gonna, you know, really get real at that point on. We were done with, you know, any kind of flatlands. We kind of knew we were gonna have to start pulling hills, and we did pull hills to get into Sturgis. You know, we came through the national park and that, and we definitely pulled some hills there, but you knew you still had the real hills were coming. But really great time in Sturgis. It's a wonderful town. It's a who's who of the motorcycle world, and we had a good time there. I enjoy going back. So now we're back on the road. We're going to leave Sturgis and we're going to head for Billings. And Billings is about 300 miles, but you know, you're really getting west now. You know, again, Dave and I are just steady eddying it. You know, we're staying on them. We're running about 45 miles an hour. We're dumping oil religiously at, you know, 2 and 3 times a day, probably about 3 times a day. You know, about every gas stop, you know, we'd get out, we'd dump that 4 ounces, repump, you know, gas up and go. So that was another pretty good run. So Billings was, you know, one of those western towns like you picture on TV when you're back east here, you know. You know for the first time that you're really getting west, because here we go, Billings is where you see it looked like they did the movies, you know, with the western scenes and all that. Very cool place. The people were really nice. To be honest with you, the attitudes out west were fabulous. It gave me new hope for America. And Billings is one of the towns that I really enjoyed. We had a nice time there overnight. So the next leg was from Billings to Great Falls, Montana. And the thing about these runs, you know, this one's about 242, 243 miles or what have, give or take. But they have to be able to put the Cannonball has to stay in towns that are big enough to accommodate you know, not only the Cannonball riders and their entourages, but each community has people that come in to see the old bikes come in from maybe 200 or 300 miles away. So they're staying in those motels in those towns. So a lot of times the mileage in between each run is dictated by where there's a decent sized town that can accommodate the Cannonball. Great Falls was another town that, you know, when you think of the West, you know, that's what it was. It was out there in the middle of Montana, you know, big sky country they call it. Beautiful, beautiful ride, and it's almost like riding the eastern plains of Colorado, you know, the high mountain. Very cool, nice ride. Dave and I did another easy day, cruised in, wasn't that far, 245 miles, give or take. Very cool, nice ride. So now I'm gonna go from Great Falls to Kalispell. And here's the thing, this is what we know. We know that on this day, we're gonna go through Glacier National Park. Anybody who's been through Glacier knows it is an absolutely beautiful national park, definitely in the top 3 or 4 in America, breathtaking. The next big question is, are we gonna go over the ride to the sun? Well, here's what, that morning we were actually given a choice. You could go up over the road to the sun, and it was you know, that was the actual initial course, but the course was wet and a little tough that day. Or you could go a different way, which would cost you 10 miles, which would kind of take you out of contention, you know, if you are in contention to try to win the race. For us, it was an easy decision. You know, we weren't in contention to win the race. We wanted to go over the ride to the sun. It's a beautiful, beautiful pass. And of course, it's an easier decision when you're on a 21, you know, with a transmission, you know, 3-speed and a V-twin 74 cubic inch motor. So we definitely chose to ride to the sun. Dave on his 15, myself on the 21, and that had to been probably the best day. Again, coming into Glacier National, you know, you stopped, you paid your entry fee into the national park, and you know, you head for the ride to the sun. We made a couple stops because, you know, you keep saying you don't want to waste time, you want to get up over and all that, but it's so breathtaking beautiful that when you get in there, you know, you just naturally pull over and, you know, look at some of the views. But obviously when we got up to the summit, and we pulled it easy, I would have pulled it in 3rd gear. You know, I had cars in front of me that actually slowed me down, so I did drop the bike into 2nd gear. But I'd actually pulled the ride to the sun in 3rd gear if I could have gone. You know, I didn't have traffic in front of me. But we pulled up on the pass, and up on top, Logan's Pass, I believe it's called, was, you know, again, breathtakingly beautiful. We did spend a little bit of time up there. We took some pictures. You know, a lot of the riders spent a little time up there. And we headed down the western edge. Now, the western edge, believe it or not, is definitely more dangerous than the eastern side. The walls are more, you know, sheer walls and so on and so forth, and there's some, you know, areas where if you make a mistake, yeah, you're in trouble. So going back down over, it was moist that day. You know, we had a little bit of rain, kind of / sleet. Dave and I were both in total rain gear because, you know, we were anticipating up on the pass either, you know, rain, sleet, or snow. I actually had wire ties that I was prepared to tie to my tires, you know, to act as chains, you know, but it was just kind of wet. We maybe had a little wee bit of sleet up towards the top, but by that time, you know, we were going up over, and I wasn't too worried about it. Went down over, you know, pretty easy. I couldn't believe how beautiful the pass was. I couldn't believe how cool the run was, and by far that was, you know, that was one of the best days of the race, if not the best. It was absolutely breathtaking, beautiful. And out of all the antique bikes that went through, and I think about 90 of us went through the park that day, not a single bike broke down. You know, I remember we talked about that. Jason had mentioned that at some point, you know, and I thought that was pretty cool that everybody was able to pull, you know, the glacier and Logan's Pass and all, and, you know, get through it. So very cool, wonderful day. So our next leg was from Kalispell into Spokane Valley, Washington. So now you're starting to come into eastern Washington. you know, you're absolutely west now. We only had a few more legs, you know, in the run. At this point in time, George and Paul, they've got the bike just dialed in. You know, we're just doing minor little things each night. You know, the greasing, topping the gas off, topping the oil off, you know, checking secondary, primary chains, you know, tightening nuts and bolts. But the bike is really running well. The bike's dialed in. It's doing super fine. I think it's about a 250-mile run that day. Again, Dave and I run great together. No major problems. You're coming into Washington, you know, the road, the ride, it was all beautiful coming in. Everything, you know, once you get out west, once you get out around Sturgis and all that, and even on 70, if you're going west, you know, once you get around Colorado, it's just, everything out there is beautiful. You know, we don't realize out east how beautiful the west is. And I don't like to say that because I'm from the east, but, you know, we have West Virginia around here, and West Virginia's pretty, but nothing compares to what you see out there. So that was another great day, about 250 miles. Easy ride, no real problems, and I believe we're down to a couple legs, so it was a really good time. So the next day is a pretty good run. It's from Spokane to Dales, Oregon. About 300 some miles, and really tough winds. I mean, when we took off in the morning, we had a wind, either a side wind or a headwind. We were gassing up earlier because we were really going through gas. And we had a long day, and I remember that was a total battle the whole day. We had got out about, maybe 190 miles, and we were running at about 8,000 feet in elevation. So, and I have a little GPS that only tells me my speed, my elevation, and I don't know, one other thing. It doesn't give me directions, that's on the map. But I know I'm running about 8,000 feet in elevation, and I'm losing power. So, you know, when you're up at 8,000 feet and you're losing power, that's not uncommon, especially with a carburetor. You know, that's typical with a carburetor. I'm not thinking a whole lot of it until I really start to lose power, to the point where for the first time, I've never had this bike at this point, I've never turned the throttle the whole way. The entire race going across, I've never asked the bike to see how fast it would go. But now I really realize that I'm full throttle and the bike is going 30 miles an hour. And I'm still losing power. And I'm looking at my gauge and I can see I'm still running about 8,000 feet. Next thing I know, boom, it coughs, it's off the side of the road. You know, I'm down. I don't know what the heck to think. When I pull off, I immediately realize that the rear cylinder is smoking. I mean, it is hot. Like a dummy, I realized that I went to, I put the bike in neutral and just went to kick it, and the bike, it wouldn't kick. So, you know, now I'm along the road, and here was a tough thing here. Dave didn't see me go off. Dave was, you know, running out in front again. He didn't see me go off, you know, so I it was up pretty high on a flat spot where he went around a curve when I went off. So I pulled off to the side and, you know, put it in neutral, tried to kick it, it didn't do, you know, it wouldn't kick. So now I know I have something going on, you know, I'm soft seized at least. Like a fool, I have a thing of water on me. I see all that smoke coming off the rear cylinder, you know, like a dummy, I throw water on it. Now that's a big no-no, but in my head, I'm thinking it's a last resort. I'm thinking if my motor's seized up and I don't get it unseized, what the hell does it matter? I'm gonna be along the road no matter what. As soon as I do that, I put the bike in second gear, and by this time, Cannonball officials are on me. There's 3 or 4 different Cannonball people that pulled up on me, and they've told me, you know, right now you're last in the race. You're last, you know, you're 94th or something at the time, and you know, the chase truck's not too far behind. So, you know, you're feeling the pressure of trying to get the bike going. So, as soon as I had, poured water on it and I put it in second gear, and I rocked it backwards, and it freed right up. Okay, it was like real quick it freed up. Now at the time I had some guys that were helping me. Some of the guys that, I think one of the guys that pulled off had helped me, you know, check the gaps and everything. He went over all the valves and all with me real quick. And they were all, everything was okay. So we, you know, in my head, I figured I soft seized. So there's a little ramp right here, and one of the ladies that helped with the Cannonball, she gave me just a little bump. She said, I'm gonna try to give you a little push down here. Well, lo and behold, she gave me a little push and boom, that thing started right up. So now I'm really excited. I got it running again. I pulled up onto this, back up onto the street, loaded all my tools, hurry up, put my leather on, you know, and I made the next mistake. You know, after dumping water on the back cylinder, now I realized I was last, but I lost track of time, okay? That's actually the other thing that's on the GPS was the time. Well, I lost track of it. I don't know how I did that, but I thought that I didn't have enough time to get in. I was doing little calculations in my head, and that was the only day in the race where when the bike took off and it started to run up top, at first I just rode at about 25, 30 miles an hour. The lady was behind me. She pulled up after about 20 miles. She pulled up alongside me and she gave me the thumbs up and she was gone. And I actually started to run the bike. At that point in time, I really started to run the bike because I figured I was gonna miss my checkpoints. And I lost track of the time. I hit 67 miles an hour. That thing would really go for that old JD. So, you know, I made it in and I told the guys what happened. You know, I actually called the guys and told them I was down along the road and I was probably gonna be on the chase truck, you know, because I told them I had seized. Well, then when I got it going, you know, I wasn't going to reach in and try to find my phone and tell them, hey, I'm going, forget about it. You know, I just went, I stopped for gas and I didn't even shut the bike off. You know, I just took the cap off, put my card in, gassed it up, you know, got back on it, and I actually gassed it twice. At some point in time, I realized that when I was passing other Class 3 bikes that, you know, are these guys all late also? You know, but by that time I'd already beat the hell out of the bike, and it was making a little bit of noise when I got in that night, but you know, it'll still start first kick right now and it still runs really well. So I don't know, it seems pretty good. So that was a really fun run right there and a long run, and it turned out well, so cool. So now we've got the last leg, man. We're gonna come into, you know, we have 51 miles to come into Portland, Oregon. And it's not actually Portland, but it's outside of Portland. But that was a really, you know, that was a day where, you know, you wanted to ride that bike across the finish line. The only thing in my head was to ride that bike across the finish line, you know. What they do is they send us off in the morning and then they restage us about 3 miles from the end of the race. And they actually take about an hour, hour and a half to restage us. And there was a nice little place there where Dave and I went and got a sandwich, and we took some pictures and we had a really nice time. Then they restage us in our classes, so they bring you in Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. You know, it was an easy ride. One of the most beautiful days, because that 51 miles was as scenic as any part of the race anywhere, including going through Glacier. That 51 miles ran along that, gee, I forget the name of the river out there. It's beautiful. But that was a beautiful, beautiful ride that day. And across the finish line, you know, it's kind of hard to describe, because, you know, that was always the ultimate goal, was to find a way to coax that bike from, you know, from Portland to Portland. You know, I think when I actually crossed the line, you know, obviously there was always that disappointment that I missed 65 miles and, you know, I missed that checkpoint. But, you know, from that point on, it was a total blast. The guys did a really wonderful job, you know, keeping the bike running, keeping you know, all the little problems to a minimum. Because I'm not the best mechanic, you know, I can ride them, but I'm not real good at working on them. But that was an easy ride in, and you know, when we came across the finish line, it was just, you know, it was pure elation. but it was a little bit of sadness too because the race was over. And believe it or not, in that 3-week period, you made such cool friends and met so many people that, you know, that traveling carnival was an absolute blast and you didn't want it to end. So, really good time though. So, you know, we don't know where we're going in 2020. Here's how the race works, to the best of my understanding. If you're a rider in good standing from the prior race, then you're invited back to the race. So we're assuming that Jason's going to invite us back, and if so, you know, obviously I'd like to ride. We also would like to get George in, you know. George, as a mechanic this year, you know, got a really great feel for the race, so obviously he'd like to ride too. So we have a couple bikes in mind, you know. I have a 13 that to me screams to be Cannonball. The 13 is a Lonnieism Jr. bike, and Lonnieism Jr., well, that is the Cannonball. So, you know, to be able to ride one of Lonnie's bikes in 2020 would be the ultimate. You know, I don't know where we're going in 2020. I don't know any of it at this point in time, but I know for myself that I'm planning on riding in 2020, wherever it may be. And, you know, I'm preparing a couple bikes, you know, so we can go across indeed. I would hope that, you know, we take another route like we just took, because that was, you know, I guess in my head I'm saying, geez, how are you going to beat that one? Because it was such a great route that the guys had picked, you know, for 18. So who knows what they have in mind for 2020. I just know we'd love to be a part of it, and you know, we definitely want to race that 13 in 2020 because, you know, that's a really cool bike.